This is the Building Automation Monthly Podcast with Phil Zito, episode 91. Hey folks, Phil Zito here, and welcome to the Building Automation Monthly Podcast, where I teach you about building automation and help you succeed in your building automation career. So in this episode, I'm going to be talking about the topic of OT, also known as operational technology, also known as a standalone private network by a lot of folks. Now, this has been a topic that has existed for quite a while in the industrial space, the kind of IT versus OT network debate. And whenever folks ask me, what does this look like? I used to go and I would say, well, look at the industrial space. But then when I started to actually think about it, that's actually not a good recommendation to go and say, hey, go look at the industrial space. Because the industrial space is not at all like the building space. I mean, think about it, right? Industrial spaces, when we talk about OT, we're talking about pulling in SCADA systems. And SCADA systems, for those of you who don't know, are basically systems that run predefined processes, and they just do them in loops, batches, just one after the other. And I know I'm completely generalizing SCADA and industrial controls. There's so much more to it, but that's not what this podcast is about. Now, as I was saying, when I look at OT and IT, I think actually it's something that is just, it's indicative of a larger problem. And we'll get to that larger problem later in this episode, because there's a huge problem facing this industry that isn't being resolved. And in my opinion, this OT versus IT is a Band-Aid for that problem. And sometimes it works and sometimes it doesn't work. So, what is this whole OT IT thing about? Well, the old way was that you would go as a building automation professional, and whenever you needed an IP system, and back in the day, and when I say back in the day, it's really like 2-3 years ago, really all you would need is you'd need servers, databases, a couple IP addresses, and a couple access links for your BAS devices. Most of the stuff that we were installing existed on serial networks like RS-485 or RS-232, things like that. And if you're like, what the heck is that? But it's just a 4-wire network. That's all it is. It's just a fancy way of describing it. But essentially, it was a 4-wire network. So the old way was that you would go to IT, and, a lot of BAS folks, they don't feel comfortable going to IT. So they have this one person who maybe kind of understands IT in their shop, and that person would go and be like, hey, I need this, I need that. And some IT groups are totally cool. They're like, hey, yeah, no worries, man. I'll get you a virtual server. I'll get you a database. Some of them were just like the soup Nazi from Seinfeld. You won't get an IP address. But in all seriousness, though, it was hit or miss as to what you would experience. And so you would have these BAS folks who they would get projects that would get held up, and they would not be allowed to have remote access, so they'd always have to physically visit the site in order to work on the BAS. And, this was irritating, but it wasn't that big of a deal. But then in the past couple of years, you've started to have these changes. You've started to have IP lighting. You've started to have IP BAS controls. And in a future episode, I'll talk even more about IP controls. I'll be talking with a guy from Optigo Networks, and we're going to be discussing IP controls versus serial controls and why you would want to do IP controls. I had a great conversation with him on the phone the other day, and it was pretty awesome, and really just kind of gave some really good reasons that I think you'll find valuable. But back to the topic. So, you have these IP controls, you have virtual servers, cloud, remote desktop, analytics, all these just IT things that involve IT, right? And so now the day of, just casually visiting the IT folks every once in a while now is becoming, a no. I was going to say more often, but I would say it's, at least during any given project, you're meeting with IT, once every 2 weeks, it would seem. I mean, between databases, IP addresses, virtualization of servers, network, firewall rules, routing, subnet exchange. I mean, all that good geeky IT stuff, you're sitting there having to work with them on that. So then, the manufacturers of switchgear and when I say switchgear, I'm not talking about power switchgear. I need to make sure I'm clear on that. I'm talking about the switchgear, like the actual IT switches that allow you to connect to the network. So the manufacturers of that IT switchgear, as well as manufacturers of other IT systems, they saw that there's this thing called software-defined networking, or SDN, and it was eating some of their market share. So they thought to themselves, hey, there's a problem that we could solve, and that problem is that the BAS folks, they really just don't have the expertise to work with IT. And also the IT gear that is getting installed for these BAS devices, it's just often it's overkill for what BAS folks actually need, because there's just so many features that aren't needed for low data velocity BAS devices, which that basically means BAS devices don't send a lot of data. They're low velocity. So they don't need, high-end switching, high-end routing, all firewalls, all this stuff. They just don't need it. So these manufacturers were like, oh, that's a market opportunity. We're gonna go and start talking like we did in the industrial space about this IT versus OT concept, and we're going to get people to start buying in that they should go and install their own networks, because that's basically what OT is. It's their own network, but I mean, it's much more than that, because it does no good to have your own network if your servers and databases are still sitting on the IT network. If your only way to access the external internet is through the IT network, then it doesn't do any good if you have a private network, because you're going to have to connect that to the IT network. And as soon as you do that, now you become liable to all of IT's regulations that you're trying to avoid. Which this all brings us to this whole thing of, okay, so the problem is that BAS folks don't understand IT, or don't feel comfortable working with IT folks, or just want an isolated network because they don't need all the bells and whistles from all the high-end IT gear, which honestly, in my opinion, that is the most valid argument for an OT approach. The I don't want to work with IT, or I don't understand IT, or IT is a headache. Quite honestly, that is not a reason to invest in OT, because as you'll learn later in this episode, if you're trying to avoid IT, and I'm talking information technology, not your IT group, if you're trying to avoid IT by going with OT, I think you're living in a fantasy land, because that's not going to happen no matter what fancy, glossy marketing cut sheet you read. The reality is stuff breaks, stuff doesn't work, stuff gets malconfigured, misconfigured. And if you don't understand how to work with that stuff, all you're doing is creating a service contract for someone. So here's the deal. If OT still requires that you have IT experience, why is it any good? What's the benefit? What does it bring to the table that is valuable to you? Well, I've come up with a couple pros based on my own experience and hearing from others around OT and IT. The first pro of OT is the little to no IT involvement. Depending on how your IT group is set up, and depending on how you implement this and budgets and all, I mean, there's always caveats, right? But depending on how all this is set up, you may simply just need to go and talk to IT to understand where their switching closets are and go from there. Or you may like have absolutely no contact with IT and just install a couple switches and servers and run the wires yourself and call it a day, and never put a DSL modem in there and connect to the internet. You're off to the races. That may be the level of involvement you have with IT. And for a lot of folks, I mean, you know, as I've been studying, how do I get my online courses out in front of more folks? How do I let folks know that I've got these awesome online courses that train them on stuff? You know, I've been studying kind of psychology and why do people go and make decisions. And the biggest reason folks make decisions is to move away from pain, which is interesting when you think about a lot of the OT marketing, when you think about a lot of the OT approach. It is to avoid the pain of working with IT. It's to avoid the pain of not having control. It's to avoid the pain of going and being kind of held hostage, I guess you would say. That is the words I often hear from folks. So, like I said, the first pro is that there's little to no IT involvement. You kind of just, it's you. Which brings us to pro number 2, and that's control of the environment. I remember a couple years back, I was involved with this data center project, and I'd been brought in. Actually, the company had been brought in. It's back when I was working for Johnson Controls. And the company had been brought into this data center project because the existing BAS contractor couldn't figure out why their BAS server kept going offline at night. It just would go offline and everything went down and a bunch of people got alarms, and it was just all a whole bunch of no bueno. So, start digging into it, and I've got a little bit of an IT background, 2 master's degrees in IT and a bunch of certifications. So I started to dig into it and noticed that it was occurring the same time every night. So I was like, did you guys ever look at what's actually happening at this time of night? And they're like, no, everything's plugged in, everything's on. It's like, well, what if we just look at the network traffic? And sure enough, they were doing a massive download on the same trunk line, on the same communication line that the BAS was on. And there's this wonderful thing in the world of IT called quality of service. If you've ever gone and been trying to do a Skype call or something on your computer or something, and then your kids are watching Netflix or playing some sort of game or something on their computers, and all of a sudden your Skype call just starts to degrade, what you're experiencing is 2 concepts. You're experiencing a concept called congestion, which is basically you're trying to shove data down a pipe. Imagine you're trying to push water down this pipe, but the pipe doesn't get any bigger, and the amount of water is starting to build up. And so what does your piping system do? It has a relief where it lets water out. Well, so do networks. They have a relief, and they basically just drop the messages. Well, unfortunately, in the world of BAS, we're like the lowest priority messages out there. And rather than going and setting up messages to be high priority and all that sort of stuff, what often happens is that, you're sitting on a network trunk and some video or some big upload comes across. It's a high quality of service item, and your BAS packets start dropping. And this is just becoming more and more prevalent now that we're seeing 4K and 8K video and all sorts of, and a lot of companies are using IP phones and IP conferencing instead of the old POTS phones. That's the plain old telephone system. So what's going on now is you have no control over that, right? You have no control over which way data flows, what data flows, how it flows, what has priority. You are purely at the mercy of that switch. And oftentimes you don't even have access to the switch to see that this is actually even occurring. So you're just kind of left guessing. And so it was no dig on the control system or the controls company that was there before us. It was that the control company didn't understand these concepts. So then you've got this final pro of isolation. And this is kind of hit or miss, to be honest. This could be a con as well as a pro. So, in an ideal world, you'd have an isolated network. It would have an air gap, which means no one can actually get to it. It's isolated. And your BAS would be secure. Well, that's all well and good until, Boiler Bob goes and he's playing online poker on your BAS server and he's like, oh, that's a cool ad. And he clicks on it. Next thing you know, you've got a worm going through your entire network, and because it's disconnected from IT, you've got no intrusion detection, you've got no antivirus, you've got no standard set up. And so you go and voila, everything is just messed up. But on the flip side, if you do have those processes in place, it can actually be fairly secure because you're isolated from the business network and all the crazy shenanigans that may be going on there. Now, with every pro, there's definitely a con. There is an aspect of OT that folks don't really talk about, but are definitely cons that you need to be aware of. And the first is IT knowledge. If you believe that you're going to go and create your own network, your own servers, your own databases, all this stuff, and you're not going to have any IT knowledge, I mean, you are living in fantasy unicorn land, and you're going to be in for a rude awakening the first time your server dies, or your database gets corrupted, or your network gets congested, or any sort of things that go on. I mean, there's so many different variables that you need to manage. Now, granted, the manufacturers have gotten pretty good at isolating a lot of these variables and making them very simple. However, at the end of the day, you still need to have some fundamental IT knowledge. And that old excuse of, oh, I'm a mechanic, I'm in sales, I'm 60 years old, blah, 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 whatever. It's not going to fly. It doesn't matter. You still need to have IT knowledge. And the fact of the matter is that there's, outside of myself, I can't think of anyone who's really teaching IT knowledge for BAS professionals. And that is a big friggin' problem. So if you think you're going to get away from this need for IT knowledge by embracing OT, I got news for you. You better think again, because that is not going to happen. Next thing is cost. So, I mean, you've got a bunch of new switchgear. Who's going to pay for that? Who's going to pay for the cabling? Who's going to pay for the servers? Who's going to pay for the databases? Who's going to pay for the DSL? Who's going to pay for someone to go and maintain this system? I mean, there's so many variables there. Now, granted, there's a lot of organizations where you have to pay a operational cost to IT in order to access their network. However, that's an operational cost that comes out of a separate budget. We aren't in the BAS industry, at least besides for servers, we aren't really conditioned to address the cost of network, cabling, all that stuff. I mean, that's not really what a lot of BAS professionals have grown up doing. So when it comes to scoping a BAS network, when it comes to pricing it, when it comes to licensing it, all of these variables, that is going to be new to a lot of sales professionals. That's going to be new to a lot of project managers who have to execute these projects. It's going to be new to a lot of facility managers who are reviewing quotes and trying to make sure they're not getting gouged on price. I mean, there's so many different variables with cost, and now you've got to expand your budget. You've got to go and absorb additional capital cost, which that always seems to be an issue for folks. And these are a bunch of variables that you need to be aware of and have both eyes open when you're going into this kind of OT approach. And finally, there's management. I've hinted at this throughout the podcast, and it's that how do you manage the OT? How do you manage the operational technology? How do you manage the network? How do you manage the servers? How do you manage login? How do you manage security? I mean, there's so many domains of IT that it can be very overwhelming. It can be very frightening. And it's something that if you don't have a good idea around and you haven't put some thought around, you're once again going to be in a world of hurt. I don't mean to be all doom and gloom and be like, oh, the world's ending, the sky's falling, but I just really want you to go into this with both eyes open. I mean, whenever anyone comes to you and promotes something to you, anything, including myself, whenever anyone does that, you need to ask, what does it benefit them? You know, if you purchase my online training programs, it benefits me because I am running a business. However, at the same time, I know it benefits you because they have a ton of value in them, as seen by my 1,100 plus students. And you need to ask yourself the same question when someone comes to you and promotes OT to you. What does it benefit them? Do they get switchgear? Do they get servers? Do they get management? I mean, what is the benefit for them to be promoting this? Because there's got to be a benefit, otherwise they wouldn't be bringing it to you. I mean, we're all businesses, right? We're not UNICEF. We're not in here for the goodness of our hearts. So you've got to ask yourself, what is the benefit to them? And then you have to ask, what is the value to me? And quite honestly, there is some good value with OT, but there's also a lot of factors that you need to consider that often aren't considered. And it's actually quite scary how often they aren't considered. So by this point, you may be like, okay, Phil, I get the pros, I get the cons. I realize that OT is just basically another IT group inside of my business. It's another network, switch, server, database, just the whole kit and caboodle inside of my business. And you may be wondering, okay, well, how do I actually go and implement this? Let's say that you've looked at the pros, you've looked at the cons, and you believe that OT is a fit for you. How would you go and implement it? Well, the first step is you've got to understand the reason why you're doing this. I mean, why are you doing this? If you're solely doing this to avoid learning IT and dealing with IT, then go spend $1,000, buy my online IT bootcamp, and you'll be able to deal with IT. And that'll save you a lot of money. But if you've got other reasons, like you want to have individual control, or maybe it's security, or maybe you have some requirements within your business that you can't address with a IT network, then by all means, pursue OT. Just understand why you're doing it. I mean, seriously, spend some time, understand why. And then decide what level of OT do you want. I mean, this is not an end-all, all-or-nothing solution. This isn't, either I implement this huge, massive thing or I implement nothing. This could be as simple as a switch that hangs off of the IT network and allows you to then have your segmented subnet, and then you do some sort of firewall or some sort of routing that goes and handles the network traffic management. But the point is understanding the scope and the scale. Just because you can do something doesn't mean you should do something. So really understand what problem you're trying to solve and then right size the solution for that problem. Now, once you've done those two things, so that's step 1 and step 2. Now you need to do step 3, which is you need to lay out all your needs. Do you need someone to help you manage this? Do you need someone to install it? Do you need remote access? Do you need Wi-Fi? Do you need routing capabilities? Do you need storage, database, servers, virtualization, cloud access? What do you need? You need to put all of this on a piece of paper. And don't worry, just dream big. Put every possible thing you could need on there. Because then in step 4, you're actually going to go and you're going to prioritize your needs. You're going to look at your business outcomes. You're going to look at your budget. and you're going to say, okay, these are things I absolutely have to have. Like, I absolutely have to have remote access. We've got tons of places that are 2-3 hours away from the nearest person. We have to have a way to connect to them. That's a non-negotiable. We have to have that. So that's what you need to do. You need to then go and prioritize those and then size out your OT vision. Once again, is this a single switch or is this a full-blown IT department you're creating? So once you've done this, then comes step 5. And this is the really, 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 really important part. This is where you need to engage an expert. And there's several organizations that you can engage that have expertise in building automation and IT. That's not something I do. I'm purely focused on teaching and helping people grow their careers and grow their BAS businesses. That's my passion. But there are definitely groups that their sole focus is going and doing that. And you find someone who goes and does that, and then you work with them, and they will help you go and build this out. Like I said, I've been on the side of that before. I was the integration program manager for Johnson Controls. I've built networks for hospitals and done all sorts of stuff. So I get how this all works. I've been intimately involved in a group that did that exact thing. But that's not what I'm focused on right now. That's just not what I am pursuing. So like I said, you need to go and find someone who will be your expert, will be your liaison. And ideally, this person will not be the manufacturer of the product you're buying. So if you're buying a switch, I don't know necessarily if it's the best idea to have the switch manufacturer be your quote unbiased expert. I mean, I've seen it done, but I mean, I don't know. I'll leave it at that. So then once you've done that, you go and you design your budget. You go and you size a budget. Okay. So you're going to go and you're going to work with this expert, this group, and they are going to help you size a budget and determine, what you need based on the needs you've gone. And they may look at your needs and say, that's completely unrealistic, or, oh, you could achieve that by doing this. And that's the sign of a good expert, of a good outfit, is they'll look at your stuff and they'll say, you know what, you've already got that capability, or what about this instead of that? You want someone who's going to challenge you and not just go and pull out an order form and quote it. So once you've done all that, then you come to step 6. And step 6 is where you're planning out your service and support model. And this is critically important, and it's a huge step that I see missed quite often, is that folks get so focused on the execution, they get so focused on the capital event, the project, that they never think about who's going to actually support this after it goes live. Who's going to service it? Who's going to support it? Who's going to be the on-call IT tech support? Especially if you've got more than just networking. So you really need to consider that, and you need to budget for that. You need to plan for that. You need to train for that. All that fun stuff. So you've done all this craziness. Now you should have a perfect idea of what you absolutely need. And now it's time to get your formal budget. Now, I didn't mention it in the steps, but I assume if you're going through this entire process that you have some form of capital budget before you go down this process, because if you don't, you really need to. Otherwise, you're wasting not just your time, but a whole bunch of other people's times. And that's just not right. That's not right to bring people on an adventure with you where they're taking time and food basically off their tables to help you out. You never had a budget in the first place. That's wrong on a lot of levels. So make sure you at least have a budget initially allocated to this project. And then once you get through these steps, then go and formalize that budget in step 7. So this is where you want to go and And you either have to ask for an increase in the budget, or you have to start peeling stuff back, or look at alternative financing sources. But whatever it is, step 7 is where you're going to formalize all that. And then step 8 is the easy part. That's implementing the plan, right? That's execution. And, it's never seems to be the execution that fails. It's the design and scoping that fails. I've done hundreds of projects. I've managed a $60 million P&L with 22 plus techs, 120 projects going on at any given time. And the projects that went well were very clearly scoped, and they were very well designed. The projects that didn't go well were either poorly scoped, or we were rushed into a project last minute because they let a BAS person go, or they just realized they needed a building automation system after the building was built. And they're like, oh, hey, figure it out for us. Those projects were poorly designed because of the rush. And so the execution went bad. If you've got a good design, chances are that even if you're semi-competent, you're going to be able to execute on that. All right, so we went through a lot here. I realized that for a lot of you, this was new. For some of you, this is stuff that you've known, but you've never heard it described in that way. And man, if you're loving this, I really encourage you to check out the other podcast episodes. Now, I'm going to have notes associated with this episode, and I'm also going to have a nice little bonus for you. And that bonus is going to be a little infographic that describes these 8 steps. So you'll be able to access that at buildingautomationmonthly.com/91. Once again, that is buildingautomationmonthly.com/91. Now, if you've been listening to this podcast episode and you've been thinking to yourself, man, that Phil guy, he knows IT. And you've been kind of feeling like, man, I wish I knew that, but I can't know that. I'm in sales, or, I'm just a tech. I can't understand IT. I mean, I'm telling you, you need to squash those thoughts. You need to go and take those thoughts, take control of them, and realize that they are a self-imposed limiting belief. They aren't true. I guarantee you, if you are in the building automation industry and having success, then you can learn IT. Just the fact that you can understand building automation, mechanical systems, all of the stuff that comes with that, you have the acumen to learn IT. You may not believe that you do, but you do. Yeah, there's a learning curve. Yeah, some of the stuff is unfamiliar and it's different. But I'll tell you, IT is actually easier to learn than BAS because IT follows a set of rules. And when you understand these rules, that's how IT things work. It's not like BAS where you have no idea what folks put in the controller or how they did something. No, I mean, that's the nice thing about IT. It's very predictable. Now, if you're listening to this and wondering, okay, but how do I start learning IT? How do I take that next step? Well, I've got the perfect solution for you. It is my Information Technology for Building Automation Professionals program. And that is an online, self-paced, forever lifetime access program that takes you through exactly what you need to know about IT. It assumes no knowledge, and it's going to take you from cradle to grave through IT. And right now, that program is open for enrollment. You'll see an image at the bottom of the podcast episode page at buildingautomationmonthly.com/91. And you can click on that image and enroll in the program. And when you do that, you will be joining hundreds of other building automation professionals who have already went through the program and are seeing massive success in their BAS careers. I'll be taking you through this program, and I'll be supporting you with group mentoring calls where you'll be able to ask your IT questions and get answers directly from myself. So I really encourage you to check out that program. It's like nothing else on the market. You can do it from the comfort of your own home, and 30 days from now, you can have massively increased your IT knowledge. So thanks a ton for listening to this episode. I'm so happy to be able to share my passion around building automation with you. That is just, I'm thankful every day for each and every one of you who comes here and listens to my podcast episodes. So thank you very much. I look forward to talking to you all on the next podcast episode. Take care. Have a good one.